On February 21st, 2005, a utility worker was walking through a cul-de-sac when he came across a woman lying face down on the ground. She was naked and had clearly been badly beaten. Her body was covered in blood and bruises. When she was brought to the hospital, she was unconscious and she didn't wake up until the next day. When she opened her eyes, it was discovered that she was injured so badly she couldn't even speak. The woman couldn't speak, but she was able to write down some information for the police and medical staff. Her name was Inna Budnytska, and she was a Ukrainian who had been working for a cruise line that had sailed out of Miami. Budnytska wrote down her name and the name of one other person, Mitchell Lipkin. Lipkin turned out to be Budnytska's attorney. While the police were initially confused as to why Budnytska wrote down his name, they soon found out there was a logical explanation. Budnytska had been injured during her work with the cruise line, and they were covering the cost of a hotel for her in Miami called the Airport Regency while she recovered. Not knowing anyone else in the city, Lipkin was the only person Budnytska could think of who might be able to help her. While he didn't end up playing a role in this bizarre case, the hotel did end up being a major player in the investigation. When questioned, Budnytska couldn't remember anything about the attack. The night before she was found, she had gone to a restaurant with a friend and returned to the hotel just after midnight. The Airport Regency had 16 security cameras in place around the perimeter, and management also has 2 security guards on duty at night. The camera showed Budnytska leaving the hotel at 3:33 a.m. to purchase a phone card so she could call her mother in Ukraine. She returned to the hotel lobby at 3:40 and then was captured once more on camera in front of the elevators at 3:41 before she seemingly disappeared. Authorities were perplexed. Budnytska had no known enemies, and nothing that they were seeing on the cameras suggested any kind of foul play. However, they did start to focus in on one individual, George Perez, the hotel night manager. Perez was last seen talking to Budnytska on the cameras several times throughout her stay. As a night manager, he also had the ability to enter any of the rooms in the building. To add to these concerning details, there was also an odd piece of footage which captured Perez and Budnytska entering an elevator together and Perez not returning for 15 minutes. Perez insisted that he had been helping Budnytska to her room after a night out, but it later came out that him and Budnytska had been friends and he had likely been wanting to hide his shirking of responsibilities from his superiors. At this time, another dark element was added to Budnytska's case. She had been raped. While this was a horrifying development, it did allow Perez to be further eliminated as a suspect, as he willingly provided a DNA sample that came back negative. With Perez out the way, the police looked for other possible suspects on the cameras or in Budnytska's life. While they did end up testing the DNA of one of Budnytska's friends, it also came back negative, and the police didn't have any other ideas. While it looked like the case was beginning to turn cold, Budnytska was trying desperately to rack her brain for any memories of the attack. She had vague memories of 2 white men leading her down a staircase and into a car. She felt sure that the rape had taken place in the back of the car while the man who did it laughed. Although these were chilling images, she couldn't remember any concrete details, and the information didn't lead to any further breakthroughs in the case. When reviewing the keycard security system information from the hotel, the police noticed something odd. The system kept track of every entry, and it found that Budnytska had last entered her room at 3:58 a.m. on the night of her attack. However, she was last seen on the security cameras getting into the elevator at 3:41. So what happened during those 17 minutes? Unfortunately, the police jumped to a biased and unfair conclusion. Budnytska must be a prostitute. The police suggested that during those 17 minutes, Budnytska had been with a client for sexual services, and that during the encounter, the man became enraged and attacked her. However, when police pursued their theory, they couldn't find anything to support it and quickly had to abandon their hypothesis. While the unexplained time gap still bothered them, eventually they brushed it off as an error with the clock systems, and they didn't think anything more about it. With the case essentially dead, Budnytska was left reeling from her experience. While she didn't know who had attacked her and left her for dead, she did feel that the hotel had played a part in her whole ordeal. Convinced that they had not adequately protected her as a guest, she filed a lawsuit against them, which cited lax security. The hotel denied any wrongdoing and immediately looked for ways to prove that they didn't hold any responsibility. In their attempt to escape accountability, they ended up hiring a private investigator named Brennan. Brennan had a long history in investigation. He had previously worked as a police officer in Long Island, New York before becoming a DEA agent. He loved mysteries and was very interested when he got the call to investigate this strange case. Brennan reached out to Detective Foote, who had been the lead on Budnytska's case. Foote agreed to hand over all of the information he had collected so far, and Brennan got down to work. Almost immediately, Brennan concluded that whatever had happened to Budnytska had to be revealed by information on the hotel's security cameras. With the hotel manager and Budnytska's friend already eliminated as suspects, Brennan sat down to do the tedious work of watching every moment of footage, frame by frame. It wasn't long before he narrowed down his suspect list to just one man. In the security footage, right before she goes missing, Budnytska is seen talking to a man outside the elevator. They appear to have a short conversation before getting in the elevator together. A few hours later, at 5:28 a.m., that same man is seen leaving the elevator in the lobby with a suitcase in hand. While there's nothing initially extraordinary about a man leaving a hotel with a suitcase, Brennan noticed a small detail. When the man left the elevator, his suitcase appeared to get caught in the gap in the doors. While we've all experienced the frustrating feeling of tugging a suitcase free, Brennan noticed that the effort the man used to get his suitcase free suggested he was pulling a particularly heavy load. Brennan referred to his next thought as a light bulb. Budnytska must have been inside the suitcase. Convinced that his theory was correct, Brennan started scanning the security tapes for other glimpses of the man. He found him several times in the company of another man who was wearing a shirt with the word Verado on it. After a quick search, it was discovered that Verado was an outboard engine that a company called Mercury Marine was producing. Further research revealed that the Miami Boat Show had taken place during the week Budnytska had been attacked, and Mercury Marine had been an exhibitor. Brennan tracked down the company but found that none of the employees had been staying at the Airport Regency Hotel that night. However, he was informed that t-shirts had been handed out to food court employees who worked for a company called Centerplate. When Brennan reached out to Centerplate, he finally got a name: Michael Lee Jones. He had worked for the company in Miami and New Orleans, and he had been staying at the Airport Regency that night. Jones no longer worked for Centerplate, but Brennan wasn't discouraged. He called up every catering and concession company he could find until he found a Michael Jones working for a company called Ovations. He was currently stationed in Frederick, Maryland. At this point, the lead detective on Budnytska's case had all but given up. Foote didn't want to collect DNA from Jones, as he thought it was a waste of time. But Brennan was insistent, and so, in April 2006, Foote traveled to interview Jones. Jones denied any involvement with Budnytska, but he did consent to a DNA sample. The DNA sample took months to come back, but when it did, Jones' DNA matched DNA found at the crime scene. He continued to maintain his innocence, but the evidence was speaking for itself. Jones was charged with sexual battery and kidnapping. This is when the case started to go sideways. While Brennan was convinced Jones had attacked Budnytska and then stuffed her into a suitcase to dump her body, Budnytska had no memory of ever interacting with Jones. In fact, she thought she had been attacked by two white men, and Jones is black and appeared to be alone. This, of course, made Budnytska a poor witness, and this was coupled with the fact that the suitcase in the footage was never found. The room Jones had been staying in had obviously been cleaned several times since the attack, and he had been using a rental car that night, which had also been thoroughly cleaned. Due to the lack of compelling evidence, Jones was able to negotiate a deal and was sentenced to only 2 years. While this was a devastating blow to Budnytska, Brennan still thought there was an opportunity to seek justice. He felt certain that this was not an isolated attack, and he began to dig into Jones's history. He got the Miami-Dade police to enter Jones's DNA into CODIS, the combined DNA index system that compares DNA from crimes all over the country. It wasn't long before some hits came up. Jones's DNA matched 2 sexual assault cases in New Orleans and 1 in Colorado Springs. The Colorado Springs attack had happened later in the same year that Budnytska was attacked, and the New Orleans cases had happened a few years earlier in 2003. None of the cases had been solved. The description one of the victims had given police matched Jones. When Jones's sentence was over, he was extradited to Colorado Springs to stand trial for his attack there. The assault had been against a woman named Rosler, who had sadly since died from reasons unrelated to the attack. Without Rosler to testify, the prosecutors needed someone else to speak on their experiences. So, Budnytska finally got her chance to hold Jones accountable.
You see, I didn't know her personally, I never saw her personally, but it's something deep inside of me told me I should go. She couldn't do it for herself, but if I could help, and I decided to go.
Now accused of multiple crimes, Jones wasn't offered an appealing deal. Within hours, the jury came back with a guilty verdict, and Jones was sentenced to 24 years to life in prison. Although the sentence wasn't a result of her case, Budnytska finally felt that justice had been served. She felt relief that her attacker was put behind bars and was happy to be able to support his other victims.
Even so, it hurt me afterwards and made me feel sick and go with my memories back, but I did it for the other people. I wish it never happened to nobody. And I feel happy that the criminal is where he's supposed to be, and he is never gonna do. I think so, I hope so. Never gonna hurt nobody in the future.
Thanks to the diligent work of Ken Brennan, a serial rapist was caught, and hopefully Inna Budnytska has been able to find some peace. Thanks for watching Beyond Crime. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support more true crime content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below.